I'm gonna sculpt for the first time. It's a little skeleton head.
Skull.
When all three sculptures are put together, it's gonna look like one really cool piece. My first attempt is not that bad. First sculpture done. It turned out so cute, significantly harder to sculpt than the pumpkin. I honestly thought it would be easier. So the plan for today, coffee, paint these sculptures, start working on the third sculpture, hopefully get it baked and painted. Come on. You can't tell me these are not adorable. It's so worth it because it kind of like renews my, right now I'm dry brushing some lighter color on my tombstone to make it look old. Anyway. It's turning out really cute. Look at it so far. What's up everyone? Welcome back to my YouTube channel, or welcome if you're new here. My name is Miranda. I'm an artist. I do art things on YouTube whenever I feel like it. This is part 2 of this video. Finally, it's here. We're finally making the final piece of this project. Well, kind of the final piece of this project. This is the last tutorial that I'm following, and then in the next sculpting video, which I don't know when it's even going to come out, I haven't even made it yet, I'm going to be making my own original sculpture, so you can look forward to that in the future. But for now, we're following a tutorial posted on Ace of Clay's channel. All of his links are going to be in the description below. He's amazing. I've been following him for such a long time, so please go give him some support. I wouldn't even be doing this if I hadn't found his channel a couple of years ago. He's the one that inspired me to want to sculpt. Anyway, let's start talking about the sculpture. I started out with some armature wire to create the shape of this guy, and then adding some aluminum foil to make the shape of his torso. And I can't remember in which video I saw this, but in the original tutorial he puts, I don't remember what it is, like Sculpey Super Light or something. I don't remember what it's actually called. But I saw in a different video that instead of doing that, you could put masking tape, and since I didn't have that other type of clay, I just decided to put masking tape, even though I probably didn't need to do this step. I don't know, I just thought if it could potentially help, I would do it. So I put some masking tape over the aluminum foil, and then I started covering that with some polymer clay. It took a little fiddling to get the torso shape right, and even then I don't really freak over the shape of the torso that I made, but I'm only critical of it because it's not exactly the way it is in the tutorial. But I wasn't trying to make my sculpture completely identical to the tutorial, so I guess it's fine. And another difficult thing was trying to make the torso smooth. After I baked it, you can see some lumps and air bubbles in the clay. I do mention that later on in the video, so I'll let future me talk about that, but I could have spent a little bit more time making the clay smooth, but I learned for next time. So after that, I started on the legs. I'm gonna be saying this was one of the hardest part of the process for pretty much every single step because this sculpture was really hard to make, but making the arms and the legs were honestly a nightmare. The clay kept slipping off of the armature wire. I didn't know what to do. Maybe I could have put masking tape over the wire to make it have a little bit more grip, but I didn't think of that at the time. I don't even know if it would have worked, but I ended up managing. I couldn't make the legs completely smooth because every time I would try to smoothen it out, it would just move the clay up and down the armature wire, and it was really frustrating me, so I just gave up at some point. But the lumpiness of it kind of looks like fabric, so I'm not complaining too much about that. It ended up working out pretty well. And then I moved on to the shoes. Those were pretty easy to make. I made some laces. I added some details of the shoes. And then once that was done, I added the cuffs of the pants. And then I started working on the suit belt, whatever that's called. I'm not gonna look it up. You can see what it is. And after that, I started working on the tail of the jacket. This is a fun process. Making it look wiggly was kind of really fun. And adding the rest of the jacket was a little bit difficult, but definitely not as hard as the legs. But something that I could have improved on here was making sure that the jacket was straight. Now, if you look closely at the finished sculpture, you can see that the jacket is off center, and that kind of bugs me a little bit. But again, everything is a learning experience. I will do better next time if I make a sculpture with a jacket or with clothes of any kind. I've learned now to pay closer attention to the little details like that. Now I'm adding some buttons to his jacket and his sweater. This again was really hard because the buttons are super tiny, and trying to grab them with my fingers was not working. And I think I ended up making his bow tie off camera because I didn't realize that my camera had stopped recording, but you honestly didn't really miss much. That was a super simple process. And then once that was done, I baked him and I started on shaping his arms to the way I wanted them to be in the final piece. And like I said, making the arms and the legs were really difficult because the clay kept moving around up and down the armature wire, but I ended up figuring it out in the end. And learning from the legs, I decided to lean into the lumpiness of the clay while I was working with it because that ends up looking a lot like the fabric that would be on sleeves and pant legs. So I decided to use that to my advantage, but I still ended up making some snakes of clay to add some fabric textures here and there. Okay, a little update. This is where we're at. I've got his torso, his legs, and his arms done. This has taken me about 8 hours around over the course of 2 days. I have another hour to work on him today, and then I have to leave to go to my dad's house. But we're making progress. I mean, I'm following the tutorial as much as I could, but I am changing up certain things. Like I changed on the buttons on his jacket. I put holes in them. I've changed up the shape of his body a little bit because, I mean, I don't want to recreate it exactly. I also repositioned his arms. So in the original tutorial, he just has his arms positioned in a dynamic way. But watching that over and over again, I always felt like he should have one of those announcer's microphones in his hands. I just feel like it would look so good. So I decided to add that in. So I positioned his arm accordingly. And the other arm is pretty much just the same. And pretty much all I have to do is make his hands the microphone and his head with his hat on. And then I have to paint it and add in the little sculptures, and I'm done. It shouldn't take me longer than another 4 to 5 hours, I hope.
Honey, you've got a big storm coming.
I mean, I've already spent 8 hours on this, so I hope he turns out good, but I really enjoyed sculpting him so far. I'm actually like kind of impressed with myself. It's honestly turning out great. There are some things that I could improve on. Like you can see that his back is a little bit lumpy. There's air bubbles in some of the clay. The spots where there's air bubbles, I can't really tell if it's textured or not, so I don't know if that's going to show through when I paint. Some air bubbles are textured, and obviously the bumps on his back are textured, so that's definitely going to show, but hey, it can't be perfect. Regardless, it looks great and I'm really proud of myself, so let's just get back into it. So off camera, I did end up making the palm part of his hands, but then I ended up starting to work on the microphone. And yes, I know I forgot to turn on the lighting for this part. I do turn it on eventually, so don't worry. The lighting will improve eventually. But yeah, I didn't really have a tutorial to follow for this microphone, so I was just looking at a reference photo that I found off of Google and trying my best, I guess. I do wish I would have made this microphone a little bit bigger because it's kind of hard to see when he's holding it in his hand, but if you look close enough you can tell that it's a microphone, so that's not that big of a deal. And yay, I finally turned back on the lights. Now I'm just working on the fingers. This was by far the hardest process because similarly to the arms and legs, the clay moves around on the wire, so just take that and put it on a smaller scale is just 10 times harder. Thankfully I ended up managing in the end, but it was really difficult. But ironically, one of the hardest process went, no pun intended, hand in hand with one of the most fun parts of the process, which was adding the details to the fingers, which are like the grooves of the knuckles, and putting the microphone in his hand and making him grip it. That was one of my favorite parts of making this sculpture. Weirdly, it's such a random part of the process, but at this point I felt like it was coming together and I started seeing the light at the end of the tunnel because he was almost done, whereas before I still had hours and hours ahead of me, and I knew the fingers would be the hardest things to make. So once those were done, it's like, okay, we're sprinting to the finish. We're not looking back. We're not stopping until we get there. And honestly, my motivation was through the roof at this point. Once the hardest parts were over, I was super excited to make the head because I knew that's when the originality would really show through. I did end up fiddling with the fingers and the hands and the positioning of the arms for a little while because I just wanted to get it right, but I think that was really worth it because it ends up looking really good. And there was a moment during this process that I felt like a true artist. I went to my mirror, I positioned my hand the way I wanted the skeleton's hand positioned, and I was trying to figure out which way my fingers were pointing, which way my hand was positioned on my hip, and I tried to emulate that on the skeleton because if the fingers are pointing to the front of his body, that's not anatomically correct, whereas the way his fingers are pointing now, they're towards the back of his body, which is the way they would naturally be placed when he puts his hands on his hip. I don't know, I just felt like that was one of those moments where I felt like a true artist. Anyway, then I started working on his head, as usual, shaping it out with some aluminum foil. But before I added the polymer clay, I did pierce a hole in the ball of aluminum foil, just so that when I needed to stick the skewer in later on in the process, it would be easy. And then I started adding the polymer clay. And I did end up sticking that ball on the sculpture a couple of times just to see if the positioning was right. And it did take a little bit of fiddling, but I think it ended up working out in the end. I did need to elongate the neck portion on the body because I made that too short. And if I would have kept it that short, he would have looked like he had no neck, and the jaw portion of the head would have covered up his bow tie, and I didn't want that, so I had to elongate the neck a little bit. And now I started making his jaw, and wowee, this was hard. It wasn't as hard as making the fingers, but it was pretty difficult. I definitely learned from my mistake of not making the torso as smooth as it could be, and I spent a little bit of extra time on the head. Then I started working on the teeth, and I did need to pull up a reference photo for this because I didn't want it to look like a couple of rectangles on a jaw. I did want it to look like teeth, and I think in the end it looked really good, and the reference photo really helped. I was really getting in the zone here. Like, there's something about doing detail work on a sculpture that is super calming, and I think I was just listening to a podcast and I didn't hear a word they were saying in the podcast. It was just nice to have some background noise, and all my attention was on making these teeth. And this is the part where the head started to come together for me, is when I added the bottom part of the jaw. I did get a little bit discouraged when I looked back at the tutorial and noticed that my skull didn't look like his skull, but I did have to constantly be reminding myself that I'm not trying to copy and paste what he's doing. I do want to make it look a little bit original, so that's honestly a lesson that we can all learn. If you're ever trying to follow a reference or follow a tutorial and it doesn't look exactly like your reference, that's okay. We each have our own individual style, and just because it doesn't look exactly like the original doesn't mean it's not good. It just means it's your style, you know? Anyway, then I made the nose and I poked a hole in the top of the skull for the hat, but I ended up poking a little bit too far and rammed my pokey tool straight through his head. But that was easily fixed, so don't worry. But I did end up doing that twice, once with the pokey tool and once with the wooden skewer, so I had to fix a hole at the bottom of the skull twice. But it's all good because I was able to work on his hat perfectly fine. The brim of the hat was kind of difficult to make. I had to remake it twice, I think, because it just wasn't the right size. And then once I figured out the correct sizing, I put it on his head and it looked so cool. I was so happy with it. And I was just so excited to attach the skull to the body because honestly, at this point, I wanted it to be done. I was very tired. It had been multiple weeks. I was exhausted. But one thing that I'm very proud of myself for is, even though I was very tired, I didn't try to rush through the process. I still spent a lot of time focusing on the little details and making sure I wasn't cutting corners anywhere, and making sure in the end I was proud of what I had done because I knew I worked as hard on it as I could, and not disappointed because I rushed through it because I was tired, you know? Okay, I'm not gonna lie. It has been several weeks. I took a break from sculpting in the middle of making this guy. It was really hard to do. I was not expecting it to take that long. I thought it would take max like 2 days. It's been like closer to 3 weeks. I'm tired. So tired. I've spent probably over 20 hours making him. Yeah, I'm just exhausted. But he's done. Well, the sculpting process is done. I still have to paint him. This is Ernie. I don't know, he just looks like an Ernie. He does come off of his stand, so I'm going to be painting this individually and this individually, and then I'll be sticking the smaller sculptures on him. I think this painting is going to take all day. I don't know, I really like the way he turned out. I think the microphone, I could have put his hand closer to his mouth and made his head be a little bit more turned towards the microphone, because now it just, from certain angles, it just looks like he's on the phone. Like, look, he's just on his phone. You know, it's cute, but I could have improved on that. I could have also improved on the shape of his torso. I don't know, I don't freak over it, but it's too late to change that now. And I really like the way I did his hand on his hip. It looks really cool. And his hat, that's one of my favorite parts, his hat. And I think the only other thing is I was debating making the microphone stand, but I think that would just be a little bit too much. So I don't know, it could be possible that he just found a random microphone and was reliving his glory days when he was alive as an announcer. I don't know. Ooh, or when they buried him in his coffin, they put a microphone without the wire, without the stand, so that he could be an announcer for all eternity because he really loved his job. Anyway, I think he's really cool. Let's see how the painting goes. I'm so tired. Oh my god. And now the painting process begins. This was honestly pretty straightforward. I painted his skull with titanium white. I had to put a couple of coats on this because it was a little bit streaky. I was using heavy body acrylic paint, which I don't know if it's the best for painting sculptures. So I did have to do a little bit more work just making sure it was smooth when I painted it on. But that's what I had. I didn't want to spend any more money on materials than I had to. And you know what? I'm all about doing things with what you have. I've always had a huge problem with impulse spending, and whenever I start a new hobby, I buy hundreds of dollars worth of materials and then I spend a week on it and I put it down and never touch it again. So in trying to not do that anymore, I'm really learning to utilize what I already have. And honestly, it's really nice doing that, knowing that I'm using what I have. So I'm going to continue to do just that. So after painting his skull and his hands with titanium white, I moved on to painting his button-up sweater with a gray color, which was just basically adding a little bit of black to my titanium white. And then I moved on to painting his suit jacket, which looks black to the naked eye, but in reality it's just a super dark brown. And basically the way I did that was adding some black to some burnt umber and possibly some other colors I can't really remember. This was a couple of weeks ago and I'm just doing the best I can. And like I said in the previous video, this painting process was really fun. I am a painter in real life, so of course this process was one of my favorites. I don't want to say this was easy for me because it definitely wasn't, but I did have a lot of fun and I recognized a lot of the techniques that were used in the tutorial and was able to understand what I was doing while I was doing it, at least during the painting process. So after painting the suit and the hat with that really dark brown color, I painted the eye sockets black. And here you can see a little bit of what I mean when I say the suit is super dark brown, because you can see a little bit of the difference between the black of the eye sockets and the color of the suit. It's not a huge difference, but it's a difference nonetheless. And then I started mixing the color for the wash that I was going to do over the teeth. In the tutorial, he does take a super fine paintbrush and paint each individual groove of the teeth, but I decided that I could just do a wash, and I wish I had just done what he had done on the tutorial or made a slightly more brown colored wash, because my wash was a little bit yellow green, so when I added it to his mouth he just ended up looking like he had thrown up, and that was not a cute look. So I had to take some more titanium white and fix up some of the areas of the teeth and the mouth, but it ends up looking okay, so I'm not too worried about it. But the wash that I made did look amazing on his hands. So I went in and just painted some of the grooves and details that I sculpted into his hands with my wash. And then I went in with some more titanium white and fixed up his mouth area where I had made it look like he vomited. And just like that, he didn't look sick anymore. And then I made this really nice muted purple color and painted the bow tie and the suit belt with it. I still don't know what that's called. If anyone knows what that's called, please write it in the comments, because I have zero clue and I'm not about to Google it. I do really love this purple color that I made because it's not too overpowering. I didn't want the purple to be too vibrant. I didn't want it to just take over. I really wanted it to look really natural and like a color that actually would have been worn, you know? And after doing that, I'm just looking around the sculpture, seeing where I can add some extra details, seeing what I can touch up, if some of the paint got chipped off as I was holding the sculpture, if I can improve on some areas. And once I felt like the sculpture was done, I just put my paintbrushes down and let it be, because I could easily go overboard with this and make it look completely terrible by hyperfixating on it and not knowing when to stop. He's finally done. After weeks of my life, Ernie is complete. I think he looks really good. Honestly, I'm really impressed with myself. I did break 2 of his fingers, but I tried to glue them together, so I think they'll be fine. I hope they'll be fine. Yeah, I don't know. There's not much to say. He looks really cool. He's gonna be displayed in probably my kitchen. I'm probably not gonna sculpt for a little while because honestly, I'm all sculpted out. I will be tagging Ace of Clay down in the description. Go check out his channel. He's really, really good. Thanks for the tutorial. It was awesome. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you enjoyed the new format. Maybe I'll do this again in the future. And And go check out all my links below. I have my Patreon, Etsy, TikTok, other things linked down there. So if you want extra content from me, more art, it's all gonna be on there. Anyway, I don't want to make this outro too long. I'm hungry. It's 7 o'clock and I haven't eaten yet. Thank you if you stayed to the end of the video. I love you so much, and I'll see you next week. Bye. Oh no. My coffee's done.